Welcome, Immortalites, to another round of the conversations. A couple of days ago, I had a chat with my friend Chris Fisher from the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. This is a podcasting network with very popular shows like Coda Radio, Linux Unplugged, Self-Hosted, Bitcoin Dad, the list goes on and on. And that's where we start off with his creation of it, his learnings from near 20 years in the podcasting world, of his decision of moving from predominantly video to audio, of how and when to start up or cancel shows, before we get on to his identifying of trends, how he knew that Linux and Bitcoin were such powerful ideas before they were even a thing on the radar. And then finally, his decisions of moving from the predominantly advertising model as well to going to more V for V, value for value, or this transition between trends he's also seeing in the podcasting and AI world and things like this. Whole bunch of stuff to get into there. I would just recommend that every boost that you send in, 30% of that goes to Chris. Every stream that you send in as well goes directly to him. So do not be stingy with those. And I really do hope you enjoy this conversation with Chris. I was going to actually ask you, have you ever thought of doing something like a silent retreat? I feel that would be one of the hardest things for you because there is so much stuff of you talking on the internet. What's the longest you think you've gone without speaking something?
It would be mornings. You know what? There was a period of time where I was waking up early, and so I would get up early and I wouldn't talk till I sat down on the microphone, and then my voice would be like this, and I'd realize, oh, it's been about 4 hours. So it's probably 4 or 5 hours. It's probably the longest. That sounds really appealing right now. You catch me in a period of life where that sounds like the thing to do. Although I get, about 5 days. After about 5 days of not podcasting, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally imagine. I did a silent retreat a couple of years ago. It was one I just organized for myself. And what I came out with it was, one, that was way too easy. I probably shouldn't be doing this because the ease at which I had of just not communicating with humans for 6 days was incredible. And I kind of just shut myself in a room. So I wasn't even like maintaining eye contact or being around other people. It was just like straight up on my own. And then also it was like, man, I didn't need to do this. Like this was excessive. It felt like I was just kind of punishing myself, like just to see if I could do it. So yeah, maybe like an easier version of shutting yourself off in a room or something would be the go.
Yeah, for me, what I try to challenge myself to do on occasion is I have a favorite spot out in the woods that I like to go camping. And even though I have great cell signal there, like 100 megabit cell signal, it's like crazy. I try not to do any online stuff because I can just burn hours online and I can get, thinking about stuff that I don't really need to be thinking about that weekend. And I already have a hard time keeping focus, so I don't need to be ingesting all that. But it's rare and rare. I thought I would do it every weekend for the winter, and I think I did it like twice. So it's a challenging thing to actually do, especially when you're connected to friends and family on these devices all the time and stuff just coming in all the time. So the idea of doing a silent retreat, that sounds really like if I just told everybody, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. I'm not going to be around for a while. Don't expect to hear back from me. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. I think we're in a similar boat at the moment. I've also been kind of evaluating some of my just input choices, I guess. What am I spending my time on? The things that I'm listening to, are these the things that are going to be helpful for me? And yeah, I'm just I've kind of been feeling the same, just like a little, just anxiety levels, stress levels, just rising a little bit, which is why I saw you boosted that mindfulness episode. So it was helpful to get into that. Let's maybe just start off with Jupiter Broadcasting, and you were talking about how you were kind of all over the shop and you got something. Was it 28 shows? Is that correct that you've had over the lifetime of Jupiter Broadcasting? Because there's also the ones outside of that. Because there was the I can't remember what it was. It was like Chris off air or something. There was the RV one. I think there was more like a politics type one as well. Unfilter as well, kind of was on and then off and whatnot. So do you keep a count of the full number?
No, it's funny. I've never thought about it until we did office hours a couple of weeks ago on it. And you're probably right. It's probably almost 30. we've tried so many random things early on, and so many things looking back at it that I kind of wish a version of me could have stuck with on a couple of them. But then a lot of them, like, God, I should have ended that sooner. So yeah, we tried a lot of things. I mean, really, we've been kind of at this for 18 years. I think Jupiter Broadcasting as an organization is probably about 16, 17 of that. It started really just as a couple of friends and myself just goofing around, and because we could do it with the technology, we wanted to do it, and just kind of took it from there. And I at that around that time when podcasting was just getting started, I had kind of moved into a phase of my career where I was now becoming like a Linux professional. I'd kind of gone from toying around with it for a few years to deploying it in production and solving problems. And I was so excited. And I was coming from, Microsoft's backyard where they actually had like their hand on my school. Like they really had a big influence in my area. And so I'm in Microsoft's backyard and I'm trying to start this career talking about how great this Linux solution is. And I'm just getting criticized and ridiculed. And people are telling me this thing's a joke. It's going to be a lawsuit for anybody you install it for. The whole thing's a scam. Like all this kind of pushback. And so I just had all this pent up desire to talk about how awesome Linux was and how it was solving these problems. And the podcast just made a lot of sense. And so started doing a Linux podcast.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit younger than you, so I missed the whole kind of Linux phase of, the first time I really heard about it was was tuning into a couple of your shows. So I'm definitely one of those ones who, I've used it without ever realizing I've used it sort of people. So that was kind of real early, right? It was, people thought you were crazy to even, talk about another
Early
operating
aughts.
system. Yeah, gotcha.
In fact, it wasn't just, it was irresponsible. It was dangerous. It was putting my clients at risk. It was putting companies at risk. And I would have companies that would come in and outbid me, in their business suits. And they would talk about, well, this kid's putting your whole business at risk with this recommendation. You can't go with this. And it was so frustrating, which of course, all of that was FUD that was primarily started by a company called SCO, who, was an old Unix company who lost a lot of money to Linux deployments. And so their strategy was, we'll fight with a legal it might have been patent. I can't even copyright something, but some sort of legal strategy that was kind of BS, but it was their strategy. And it did create, a certain amount of fear and uncertainty and distrust in that CTO layer of a business, those people who are managing the technology and managing the risk. And so those people are often calling me, risky, reckless. And it was so silly. So it feels a lot like the shade that Bitcoin gets today is a lot of what the early free software shade was from those types.
Interesting. And what was your strategy with kind of dealing with that? Would you try and fight it? Because there's like a temptation to call out like the mistruths, especially when you're you've put in the 1,000, 10,000 hours or whatever of work to get through it, or is it kind of like one of those inevitable things and you're just like, they can say that, but I'll just keep going on?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depended on the client. Sometimes it'd be a write-off. Sometimes I'd come back with a counter proposal. I was a pretty good sales engineer back then, so I could sell pretty well and talk to it technically and talk about the overall long-term maintenance cost was going to be lower. The amount of systems we would need would be lower, and the downtime would be less. And so a lot of places, that's the number one thing. And so if you can speak to those, they would listen sometimes. Sometimes I'd lose a client. Sometimes the other thing that would happen is I'd wrap up and the next guy would come in and he'd be a Windows guy and he would just crap all over everything I had done. Blame all the problems because he didn't know Linux, right? So he'd blame everything on me and then replace it with Windows systems. And I kid you not, multiple times that guy inevitably would burn out or get fired and they'd bring me back in to fix it all up again.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You've got an ability to deal with stuff like that, which I do not. If I had to come and resolve a problem, which was, once fixed, I'd just be like, nah, you guys are on your own. I think I would give it up.
Man, it's pretty common in that IT consulting space where you're coming in and you're backwards engineering what somebody else did. you're fixing, years of technical debt that they just couldn't deal with, but now it's become such a problem that it's preventing production. Like that is such a common thing for that IT consulting thing. It's so frustrating that I think ultimately it's why it wasn't really for me. I had to kind of transition out of that and into podcasting.
Yeah. And when you went into podcasting for the first time, so I was going through a lot of your back catalog and kind of listening to how JB was created and whatnot. And the one thing that stood out was you were talking about how you had a lot of this like sales experience. You knew how to, I suppose, like be in contact with people, keep up relationships and whatnot. And this is actually what helped you with the advertisers when you first started JB. And it's kind of, I'm watching now and I'm wondering, like, I think you always had kind of like a sponsorship, not a sponsorship, like a listener support mechanism as well. You were doing a lot of that. But it seems right now, at the very least, with all the stuff that's going on with just like, economics, downturn coming, recession, stuff like that, advertisers starting to pull out money and whatnot. Is for you and JB the long term kind of more of a value for value? Will it be, do you think, more important perhaps in the future? It sounds like there'll always be a spot for advertising in your shows and network.
Yeah, it depends, to address the last part there, a spot for advertising. There are certain things we want to do that are kind of ambitious. Like I would love to take a road trip and do a dozen meetups on that road trip, right? That's one of my favorite things to do. That right now, that's $15,000. That's a $15,000 trip. It really actually costs that much. And JB usually just pays it. Or we get a sponsor. Because when you think about the gas and the time and all of the mechanical stuff and just it is unbelievable how much it costs to do that many meetups on a road trip. Maybe 50. Yeah, no, with gas, yeah. It could probably be done for 8, but that's what, we did one to Denver, and that was about a $10,000 road trip is about how much it cost us to do that road trip. So to do something like that in the value for value model, it would either be very rare, which maybe would be fine actually, or the value for value model would have to be so successful that we're kind of looking for things to do with the money.
Yeah.
Which would be an amazing place to be, but I don't know if we don't have 1 million people downloading an episode, so I don't know if we're gonna be able to get to that scale. So I could see a spot where the production costs, maybe the pay even for the host, because we don't get paid a lot, but we try to pay people involved. Maybe that could be covered with value for value, and then something like a $10,000 road trip. Or a flight to Munich, something like that. Maybe that could be covered by sponsors. It's some sort of hybrid model. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. I was kind of using this advertising downturn as an opportunity to sort of trust fall into the audience and kind of see how far we can push it. Because when we had a boom with advertising and the economy, what you do, a golden rule of media is when the sun shines, you make hay. That's what you do. Even if that means you got to work your butt off at a period of time where it's not a great time to work your butt off. But the sun isn't shining right now. And I've worked really hard for the last few years since going independent. So I'm kind of okay with slowing down for a little bit, healing a little bit, reevaluating a little bit, seeing how much we can transition to value for value, because we have to walk a journey with our audience who is, not only are they used to the shows being advertising based, but a lot of them like the ads. So like they don't even have a problem with the ads being there, because we've done a ton of work to pick the right advertisers. And I get this, I seriously know this sounds ridiculous, but I seriously get this email all the time when I talk about value for value. People say, I don't mind the ads. I think your ads are great. I listen to your ads. I pay for the membership to get the ad-free feed, and I still listen to your ads. Not everybody likes the ads, obviously. Don't get me wrong, but the issue is we've worked really, really hard to pick good sponsors. So the problem is they don't mind the ads, and I've been reading ads for 15 years, so I know how to do it.
Yeah.
And so, like, they're not really necessarily they don't really have a problem. And I'm not even kidding you. Actually, as a data point, Years ago, we sold to Linux Academy before we went independent again, during the time where we were owned by Linux Academy. The first thing we did was drop all ads. So none of our shows had any ads. I didn't get a single email saying that that was a great thing.
Yeah.
Nobody emailed in. And when we brought the ads back, nobody emailed in complaining.
Yeah. That sounds the life of a podcast.
There's nothing else I do on the podcast where everybody has an opinion usually about some sort of change, but there's that problem too. And I have to recognize that. So maybe there's a role there somewhere. I personally am getting really burned out on advertising because the more ads you have and the more shows you do, the more of your time it takes. So, but then it's not just that. It's contracts with hosts to make sure the payment stuff's going right. It's relationship management. It's the fact that a lot of sponsors want more right now. And so they're having meetings with you. They want more information because they really want to squeeze that value. And, they're just asking, it's not a big deal, but they're just asking if maybe they could have somebody on your show to, maybe a topic expert that can come on your show and help you. And that even the best sponsors in the world are asking for that stuff right now, just because they're trying to just squeeze more out of the deal. So I see the direction it's going, combined with dynamic ad insertions, combined with generative ads, which you might have heard about from Pod News and the Bill Simmons podcast, where AI is just going to sound like Bill. And they're going to dynamically insert generated ads, which is going to cause a absolute race to the bottom in pricing because you're completely taking away all of the value of a host read. A host read is when the podcaster does the read and they have to learn the vernacular of that company. They have to learn the nuances of the product to promote it correctly. Ideally, the podcaster uses the product and that podcaster is using their reputation to endorse the product. When AI generates the ad, you take all that away. Well, that's the value of the host read. You just took all the value of the host, so it's going to create an absolute race to the bottom in advertising pricing on podcasting. They want it to be like YouTube. They want to be able to buy ads at scale, and I don't want that. I don't want that hassle for my shows. It takes my focus away from the content, and it's going to, over time, lower the quality of the ads. It's going to require an increase in the amount of ads because the overall payout's going to go down, and it's going to become more like radio for the podcasts that stick with commercials. Or advertising. They're going to just have commercials, and they're going to have generated commercials.
Yeah.
I'm not really looking forward to that future.
Yeah. So much of this is kind of me wondering, is this, like intuition or instincts, or is it just kind of inbuilt personal preferences, which are rearing their head? And we'll get on to like a little bit of how you're really good at kind of focusing on the future and identifying trends and whatnot and soon. But I've always just had this real dislike of ads. I can remember like 8 ads maybe over my lifetime, and there was just one that I think there was this one really formative experience as a kid, which I'll repeat quickly. And it's one of those ones where I actually look back now and I'm like, oh, geez, did this even happen? Or is this just me making up shit as a kid? Because I've had some memories questioned recently of being like, oh, no, wait, I wasn't changing my brother's nappies when I thought I was, like helping out the babysitter and stuff. I was way too young to do that. But I was like, 8 years old, something like that. I saw this advertisement on TV and it was this toy, which was essentially like, the game Doctor where you have tweezers and you put it in. It was a version of that, and it was kind of like a rotating spaceship thing. And so you'd have multiple people on each side trying to pick it out as it's moving. So it's like a moving version of Doctor. And I remember it was like $50. I saved up pocket money, bought it, and all the kids on this ad were like having fun. They were, everyone was life of the party sort of deal. And I got this thing. And it was just so boring. I remember it being so disappointing. And it taught me one thing about money, like the value of money. And from then on, I was like, well, money doesn't buy me happiness. But then I think too, it was kind of like, fuck advertising. Like this didn't give me what I wanted,
They weren't honest.
I mean, look, maybe it happened somewhere. Who knows? But it obviously it was a piece of media that was designed to sell something and not to entertain in of itself. And so for a long time, I've just really disliked ads and basically for all the reasons you mentioned, not wanted to have anything even close to that, touching any of the stuff that I do. So I'm very more of an extremist on that end. But I look at something like value for value, and I go like, yeah, I think it just makes sense with all the other headwinds in the industry of just yeah. I mean, like even AI and things like that. It just seems that value for value, and now that there's some technology that can help facilitate this a little bit better, the digital money,
Yeah.
programmable money.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just leading me to think, yeah, value for value is kind of the way to go. If it's not for everyone, it's not going to replace everything, but I think it deserves a bigger portion or more adoption than it currently does.
I think it's kind of a sea change for podcasting, because before Boost and programmable money, each podcaster had to set up their own boutique way to support them. And then there was trends like Patreon, but we discovered that wasn't ideal. And so each podcaster, depending on the age of the podcast, is using some system, or YouTubers, they have built-in mechanisms now on YouTube to do kind of like super chats and memberships and one-times. And Twitch has a similar mechanism of course, it ties in with Prime. And every platform and everybody who's making media for that platform is trying to do these built-in monetization options. But Boosts are the only one that is absolutely 100% vendor neutral. So that's a big winner for me, just trying to build the business on something. And the fact that the button can be built in on the new podcast apps is massive. I've been hearing from people that I just got a boost into the show I did 2 days ago from somebody who's been listening since 2007, has never written in, never ever contacted any other podcast. But because the button was there and they had some sats, they finally sent me a message after all these years.
Super cool.
And it's powerful, really. And I think the other element that I don't think is going to make value for value like take over the medium completely, but I do think makes it now a bit inevitable is we've never had this sort of rising tide lifts all boats effect, right? When I, as a podcaster, onboard a few hundred people to boosting, and you as a podcaster onboard a few hundred people to boosting, and Adam onboards a few thousand people to boosting, we all are bringing more people on. Those are people that are preloaded with sats that are interested in listening to that ecosystem now, and they're going to listen to each other's shows. And I definitely see folks that are boosting my shows, that are boosting other shows, and it's created this tight-knit network for it is forming this root structure for podcasters that's never existed before. I've always for like 17, 18 years felt like I am on my own little island of podcasting. And people just happen, their boats happen to be going by my island. They see what I got over here and they stop by and they listen to my podcast. But now with the solidifying ideology around value for value, the solidifying language, which hasn't really been a shared language outside of Adam shows, and the technology, I really feel a root structure that links me to other podcasters in a way that I've never experienced. And that feels like a massive shift to me. And the fact that, when somebody boosts me, then they're on the network, they can boost you. That means that even if you don't have a ginormous show, you can still participate in this economy. And I've mentioned it before, but the Bitcoin Dad pod that I do is significantly smaller than our Linux Unplugged podcast. And there have been weeks where we've made more in boosts on the Bitcoin Dad pod. Of course, it's a very, targeted audience, but we've made more in boosts on the Bitcoin Dad pod than we did on Linux Unplugged, which is a show that's been around for almost a decade and has a ginormous audience.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. It's not going to be for everybody. It won't work out for everybody that way, but that to me felt like it's just all of that combined with the language and the culture and the actual technology, bringing us all together, feels like it's a whole new era for podcasting. And so there's at least going to be some of us that embrace that because it's kind of irresistible when you understand all of it.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you were kind of looking out for something like this because I tuned into, it was something I think of in 2020, but before podcasting 2.0, before that even started the index. And you were laying out basically all of these, all of the problem, these same problems that you were seeing with advertising, with not being able to connect with the audience and whatnot, of Spotify trying to create the walled garden.
I would like to see that clip. I should play that clip on my shows. That sounds great.
Yeah. I'll try and find which episode. Look, man, over the last 3 days, I've listened to a lot of your stuff.
Deep dive, I can tell, yeah.
Yeah.
I tell you what, it has been something that, especially since I've gone independent, I've really felt like is an issue. And when I went independent, the next day I tried to launch the membership program. And that was really also before, everything we just talked about. And it's been probably huge. It's been a huge success for us, but it's been me trying to solve this problem that entire time, trying to come at this problem in various different ways.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I want to get back to the start of JB as well, and I suppose the ending of a show. So there's something I've been thinking about where you've identified, if you're a podcaster, you tend to just accumulate more shows. It grows outwards. I'm up to 4. I had 5 at one point. One of them I kind of let slip, and the RSS feed doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure I'll put it back at some point. But when do you know when to end a show, or even like, do you try as hard as possible to save it first? What's kind of goes through your head when you're doing all of these shows?
Well, it's a lot easier when hardly anybody listens, let me tell you. It's a lot harder when
and
more
what's
people
the most
listen.
you've had going at one time as well?
I mean, we may have at one point been 8 or 9, maybe almost a dozen shows going, and then we kind of whittled it down to about 8. And then when we went independent, kind of down to 5.
Yeah, and you would have been appearing on most, if not all, of those shows?
Not at our height. No, we started to build out shows that didn't require me, which was nice. But I was probably on 4 or 5 of them, which is a lot. It's too many. Honestly, it's still too many. So there is sort of that kind of overwhelming aspect of it. That's just a too high of a production load, and it really starts because with advertising you do need to have a lot of inventory, and then there's a lot of you start at these shows. Some of them are successful, and so what we kind of ended up with was sort of our best hits. And so now the problem is I have too many shows that I'm doing, but all of them are doing well, and they all have a big following, and there's going to be a massive upset if I cancel it. And so that is very hard. So I have continued to, well, and plus there's advertising revenue, right? Like I said, when the sun's shining, there's that element too. So now it's like the farm isn't producing anything because the sun has stopped shining, and we're basically almost out of produce. And I'm exhausted, and I can tell I need to take some downtime. I have these little road, these little indicators that I've developed. They're like signs on the road and I can tell I'm approaching the real bad burnout exit. So I got to be careful. And so I know I have to cut back. So the question I now try to come to is, can I transition other people in and keep a show going? Some shows, could I just pause for a bit? I still just really struggle with the question, because you feel a certain responsibility if you create something and you ask people to like it, and they do like it, and they build a routine around it. Now I'm the jerk that's going to go and stop it, So I still hate the problem. It's still really hard, especially when they're doing well. It was, looking back at first, what I realized early on is like I didn't recognize a failure because I hadn't had a big success. And so I was grinding it out, and that was a mistake. That, looking back now, I could easily like office hours. I shouldn't be doing office hours. It qualifies. It doesn't get enough downloads. It takes time that I could be spending on other stuff. It doesn't really have any kind of revenue potential. But in value for value, that model changes, and I can flip it on its head and be like, well, if I get enough audience support for it and they demonstrate its value to them, then it's worth the company producing. And so we're continuing to run office hours. So it's my way of saying it depends. So if you have a show that gets, I mean, I'll just put numbers out there, just my opinion. But if you get a show that gets, couple thousand downloads, yeah, you can keep grinding that out for a while. You'll probably grow it, but you might also put it on the shelf, try something else that maybe would be even a bigger hit and resonate. Because with value for value, it still has to be worth them supporting, has to be worth them downloading. doesn't mean they're just going to throw sats at you if it's not worth throwing the sats at. So one of the things that I took over those 16 years or 7, whatever you want to call it, 15 years of doing JB was I had to learn which shows were failures earlier on. And I have internalized that now. And that's why we kind of have the load we have now, the shows we do have.
Yeah. Because I look at the mere mortals, and we've kind of branched out some things, and I've also changed some stuff. And also, funnily enough, like one of the problems I think I have is I don't lean into the successes sometimes. So, for example, I had this one show. It's actually the one which I let lapse. Was called Reseñas in Spanglish. It was basically where I would do Spanish book reviews. So I would do these book reviews in English, and I've got my little book here where I write my notes for the book review. And I was like, man, I'm doing all this work to do a book review in English. Like, it's not that much extra to translate all that stuff that I've got. Just write I'd say the exact same stuff, but in Spanish, and do it as like another podcast. And there was definitely an audience for that, where it was kind of, because it's really niche. A random Australian guy talking about books that were written in English, or for the vast majority in English, translating that into Spanish. And so that was one of the shows that like kicked off. And I remember as I was like deleting the feed, or the host that I was with was ending it up, I quickly went on to like the what was it? I think it was like the Apple Podcaster Connect area, where you can kind of go in the back end. And I had like 600 subscribers in there for a show which I put not much effort into. And I was like, whoa, holy shit. I didn't realize it actually had kind of an audience base. And I'd let that lapse for ages, because funnily enough, it actually did require a lot of energy doing it in Spanish. And I was using that more just to practice my Spanish rather than the joy of doing book reviews in Spanish.
Yeah, that makes it hard to stick with.
Yeah, for sure. And so there was a couple of things where I was like, oh man, I've had some successes, things kick off. Another one, and this one I'm rather proud of, was I talked about this meme coin once, and that was like the most downloaded episode. I was just like, Jesus Christ, what am I going to do? And I've talked about it once or twice before, but it's not like I didn't transition the show to becoming like, oh, let's talk about meme coins or anything like that now. So it was I look at you, and I'm amazed at what you've done, and I feel like that's the kind of lifestyle I want to try and create, because I'd say you're much ahead of me in that journey. And I just go, should I break up the mere mortals into multiple different things, where it's, conversations in one feed, because we kind of already have these distinct categories, but we put it all in one feed. And I don't know. It's one of those ones where I go, is it, a question for you, like you've created many niche shows, and you've got also shows which kind of overlap. You had Linux Action Show, Linux Unplugged. I think you had a couple other ones which were, Linux adjacent. Would it have been better to just have, one main ship, and even if it had kind of slightly branching stuff, it's still just the one place people go to?
Would have been a lot easier. I think if I had one dream, it would be just one show, which I don't think it's possible, but just one show to think about, one show to write notes for, one show to focus on, one show to do community stuff for, one show for swag. Just give it my absolute full creative attention.
Yeah.
That sounds so great, but I think it would be a 2-hour show, or maybe even a twice a week.
Yeah.
Show. And I think there is a market for long shows. Obviously, I think there's some small podcast called Joe Rogan's Experience that does decent.
Yeah,
and
I might have heard of that before. Yeah.
It's longer. But I not every podcaster is Joe Rogan or Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak and can do 3-hour podcasts.
Yeah.
And so I think if the topic, it's topic dependent, but I think an hour to an hour and 10 is probably the most. And like with our Linux Action News podcast, today's episode was like almost 15 minutes. I mean, it's really tight.
Mm.
And if you think about the audience there, somebody that wants to stay informed on Linux, doesn't really care about any of the drama. Maybe they use it at work. Maybe they do cloud development. Maybe they're just enthusiastic, but they want to just stay focused on that kind of stuff. You're interested, but are you interested for 2 hours? Probably not. You probably got other things going on in your life. But 15 minutes? Yeah, you could pop that in on your way home. You could listen for 15 minutes and get up to date. I don't think it would work as a 2-hour show to do Linux news. Out of all my shows, it'd be so easy to make Linux Unplugged 2 hours every week. I mean, our member show that we record is often 3 hours long. So
Yeah.
it's definitely easy. And it would be wonderful. But I kind of think one of the realities is that you kind of have the whole people want what's on the label. And if you've got a product that says this talks about this thing, and then you open up that product and it's not that thing, it's kind of like the toy you were talking about. You're kind of disappointed, right? You feel a little deceived. So it's hard not to have that. With a 2-hour show, what do you title it? What's the focus of the show? What are the show notes focus on? Because you likely talked about multiple things that could be the focus of the show notes. So anything you put in the show notes, anything you make the title based on, the artwork, is only going to reflect a single topic in that show at best. So it doesn't really represent what the podcast is about. Now, of course, if you have a long-standing audience, they get that. But how do you build to that kind of large audience with a product that doesn't seem to exactly appeal in discovery? Like, it just doesn't seem to work. Like, ultimately, I think, hurt your discovery options. You hurt your recommended listeners, kind of funnel. And I think you kind of end up with a diluted product, even though personally, it would absolutely be what I prefer to do.
Yeah. Well, you were talking, I remember about the niching shows when you were doing that kind of show overview on, it was Office Hours, wasn't it? Where you were doing like the review of the JB shows. And
I guess we were strolling through the graveyard, I suppose.
Oh man, it that came out at the perfect time for me. That really, really helped. So I'm glad you did that episode. And you were talking about the niching of shows and how, I suppose on the opposite end of this, you can have people who are where it's you're niching, but you kind of shouldn't, because the Pat Flynn classic, like the riches in the niches, and then he'll be like, or niches, however you want to say it. And there's kind of like a faking aspect, I guess, where you're doing it just because it'll do well, and you've had so much experience with this where you can kind of tell, okay, if I start up another show on this one topic, it'll probably do okay, but then if you try and force it, if you're trying to force a really niche game show and you're actually like not that into it, the audience can kind of tell after a while. What do you think it is about that the audience can tell? Is it something in your voice? Is it the I don't know. It's funny, like looking at that and going like, what exactly is it that people can tell is kind of off or weird about something?
It makes you wonder, like, what kind of like energy are we signaling, right, to the audience when they're listening? Can they tell we're tired? Can they tell if we've had a bad day? And can they tell if we're disinterested? And I suspect the reason why they can tell if you're disinterested is, A, if they really know you, right? Because with podcasting, you spend a lot of time with somebody's voice. You get to learn sort of the moods and tones of their voice. So, like, a lot of my audience, I had this interesting situation with Linux Action News where we had to shut down production for a little while when we were still part of a parent company. I'll just say that. And I was really limited with what I could say about it. So I said everything with tone. And the audience that has been listening to me the longest was able to take the entire subtext of the situation without me actually saying it. So you have that element of it. But then I think ultimately the problem with a podcast where you're not really passionate about the subject material, you kind of found your success. This is a thing that happens, I think, with a lot of content creators, especially with YouTubers who find themselves in niches. They burn out. They get, you start something, you're excited about it. Time goes on. You're not really excited about it anymore, but no, it's what you're known for. So you got to keep doing it. And So you just keep, like, I think about these Minecraft YouTubers, or I'm not even kidding. This morning I came across a YouTuber who focuses on Age of Empires 2 exclusively on his channel.
Dang.
Came out in like 1998 or
Yeah.
something like that, right? And that's his. You got to imagine he's a little burned out on Age of Empires after all this time, right? But it's what he's known for, and I think it can work to a degree for some things like games, because there's a community there. But if I'm listening to a podcast about Linux or Bitcoin or whatever it might be, I'm doing that because I'm super enthusiastic about that thing. I am really a nerd about Linux and Bitcoin and that kind of stuff. And so, as a nerd about something, I can kind of tell when somebody else isn't a nerd and they're not as excited. They're not picking up on the things. And so, I think that's also another dead giveaway is you can just tell the host hasn't really been keeping up to date on sort of the most recent stories or some of the changes. Like, that's a big thing you can tell even with the Linux podcaster sometimes is like, oh, you haven't actually been playing with this. You're just talking about it. You have an opinion about something, but you never actually used it in production.
Mm.
Oh, okay. And then people, but they think it's human nature.
Yeah.
They can't help it. They got to try to get paid, I guess, or they want the attention. I think a lot of them just do it for attention.
Yeah,
I'm curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah, that's one of the ones I worry about, which is getting stuck into something. Like I said with the kind of meme coin thing, I don't want to talk about it. It was a funny thing, but I'm not going to dedicate my life or even a portion of my life to to talking about this funny thing. And I think the thing with YouTube as well is and video, and we'll get onto that shortly, is there is this, because they have such a strong mechanism for the audience to get back, the YouTube comments. I love YouTube comments. One of the reasons why I will listen to a podcast which is on YouTube and not on the audio platforms is not even for the visuals. It's just to be able to go to the comments, and I scroll basically every YouTube video I go into. I look at the comments. Just I find it so valuable. And I think that's maybe actually one of the things that you might start to see with if podcasting does have this more community in the grassroots and that forming is you could actually have one of the bad things about YouTube, which is people getting stuck in these niches, which perhaps they don't really want to, but that's where they get some attention. That's where they get some money. That's where they get fed maybe whatever it is that they're looking for. So yeah, it's just one of those ones you got to be careful of. I'm always more about the consistency, the journey, and that's probably why I won't break up any of the mere mortal stuff, and we'll have a chat with you followed by what's the one that's coming out? We were talking about getting sick. You can probably hear it in my voice. I've been a little bit sick this last week. We'll have those two things kind of back to back, and it's okay. It's about the journey, and then we'll have the monthly goals about what we're doing, and it's more about the journey rather than the kind of like the final getting to one niche or explaining this one thing really, really deeply.
I feel like if the whole world used Fountain, this would be a solved problem, because I'm subscribed to the show and I don't catch every episode, but I can't catch up of every episode of everything I'm subscribed to. But I definitely notice in Fountain when people start boosting in and commenting in that activity feed. And I almost always listen to those episodes when I see a lot of engagement there. It's my signal. And that to me is like a huge change. If you could, because then you could produce all day long, and the high signal stuff raises to the top because people are spending hard money on it to promote it. And that to me would kind of open up the door to what you're talking about a little bit more than the traditional model, which is get as many downloads as possible.
Yeah. I've always tried to not focus on that. There was a period where we were tracking things a lot, and thankfully we gave it up because it was just like this is kind of pointless. Even if number goes up slightly, it doesn't mean anything. What does mean something is a really nice email coming in from someone reaching out, or like a boost. Classic. You sent in I think it's the biggest boost we've had, maybe the second biggest, and that has done more for the show than anything any amount of social promoting, any just like wheeling and dealings of my part, or strategies, or anything like that. No, it was just a very kind message and boost from you that came in, which elevated it, and it's great to have those mechanisms. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how a listener could send a large boost in, and it not only is like a shot of adrenaline to keep the show going, but it is also a major contributor, if it's a large boost, to discovery. Because the thing is, and I would not have guessed it, but you and I both have seen it. Fountain drives numbers.
Yeah.
Like they have some users, and when you get promoted on Fountain, you get in the top charts or you get on that activity page. It's a game changer for a podcaster. We experienced the same thing with the Bitcoin Dad Pod and Linux Unplugged in both those places. Saw huge downloads when we were on the top charts, and it's great. And that's how it should be, right? Because it's essentially it's a personal recommendation. It's just done via Sats.
Yeah, exactly. One of the first things when Fountain first came out with the charts, it wouldn't have worked back then because no one knew about it. Was there's a clip of me on the episode with Juan saying, if you wanted to game this, it would be so easy. Set up a Fountain account on a separate phone or a separate device, load in a bunch of sats, send it to yourself. You get 95% of it back because Fountain takes 4 and 1% goes to the index. It's one of those ones where it's like, just because it can be done doesn't mean it should be done, I guess. Or it's like, or in the opposite case, it's people will probably start doing this, I think, at some point. And so it's just like, enjoy the unfiltered
the purity of it while it is. Yeah. The only kind of solace there, right, is there is a cost both to you, but also to the rest of the ecosystem, because if you start making it the norm to send in a row of McDucks or something all the time to get up on the charts, well, then you just raise the bar to get everybody else's podcast on the charts. So there's that element of it. But yeah, you could do it. I don't know how long you'd want to do it, because if you think about the process, you're either going to take all the sats you've earned and then just basically keep taking a haircut on them, or you're gonna go buy sats. You're gonna go KYC some sats just so that way you can then send them in, and like the whole process, right? It's not as simple as going over to a website, giving them your PayPal information, and buying a bot farm to do 50,000 downloads on your podcast to get you at the top of the iTunes chart. That is a lot simpler, really.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But, outfits like iHeartRadio, they just, and others, but they're the ones that stick out in my memory at the moment. They just openly talk about how that's part of their marketing strategy, is just going out and buying bots to do downloads so they show up on charts. And they just consider that the acquisition cost for a listener.
Yeah.
It's just to game the charts.
Yeah, it's insane. And one of the things Juan said when I first mentioned that was also that kind of authenticity. Even no matter how well you craft that message, no matter how you do it, people will kind of look at it and be like, just something seems a little bit off about this. It's why is it coming in at this time? Why did they use that phrasing? That sort of deal. So yeah, it tends to come out in the end. If you were starting JB like nowadays, so let's imagine you're 15 years younger. Would things have changed? So you used to do video, a lot of video, and then you kind of transitioned out of it because it was taking so much time, and the I guess payoff wasn't as much as the audio, which is something I've noticed as well. The audio is kind of where you want the long term listeners to kind of be. Would things have changed for you? I think if there had been more of this focus, which is on the short form, on the TikTok, on the splicing into things that are 20, 30 seconds long, do you think you would have did video differently? I'm curious as to what you think your shows might have been like if you were doing video, or starting off with the kind of current era of how media is consumed.
The thing that probably is the biggest change from how we were doing video back in the day is, it's so obvious in retrospect, but the whole clips channel, where you take an hour, 2 hour long podcast and you cut it down into 2 to 5 minute, 10-minute clips and you release them on YouTube. That's so obvious. It never even occurred to us. We were trying to make YouTube the place to do long form content. I wanted
Mm.
people to be interested in watching an hour long or 2 hour long podcast. And there are people now. I know you probably know since you've been listening to the back catalog, but I got harassed every episode. If you go look at the comments on our old videos, every episode, people are in the comments and I'd get emails harassing me for having a big microphone and headphones on while I'm doing video. And now everybody does it on video on YouTube. So I would probably be inclined to start video if I were starting today and then do the clips thing. However, that's because I would be an amateur idiot, right? I would not be an experienced podcaster. Audio is such a beautiful medium. It is, first of all, way more entertaining to visualize me than it is to actually see me. Like, that's just the reality of it. That's always the truth. We never live up to the image in people's mind. And the other thing is if I want to do this for the next 15 to 30 years, however long my health holds out, I want to do this from spots all around the world. And likely in places where I have borderline barely any connectivity. And I'm having the time of my life. And I'm coming down and I'm sitting down on these shows and I am energized from my trip. I'm energized from where I'm staying and the travel. And I can bring that into the show and just have a great podcast. And if I need to have a 5 megabit up down video stream with low latency to do that, or if I got to bring a whole bunch of camera gear with me on my trips, that's not as much fun. And it also limits what I can create and what I can publish when I'm mobile. And today, for a while, I have been very stationary, but there will be a period in my life where I'm not as stationary. And when I am out and about, or I'm traveling, staying in a hotel room or in my RV or camping, I am so grateful to do audio. And it just enables me to continue to podcast. Because if you're doing something for 30 years, you make it hard on yourself. It really becomes a grind. So what we've kind of done is we've done like this minimum viable video setup where I've got webcams in the studio. And when we do the podcast from the studio, which is like 90% of the time, I turn the webcams on. And we record that and we stream it on our PeerTube. I stream it on YouTube, but I don't even keep it on YouTube afterwards. And I mean, I just can't stand the YouTube algorithm, the platform, the way it kind of incentivizes people to essentially compromise on their morals as a creator to appeal to that audience, to the kids that watch YouTube, to the algorithm. And I just wouldn't really want to be caught up in that. And I wouldn't want my income to come from something as finicky as Google and YouTube.
Yeah.
Which has new trends and new crazy things happening, every year or two. And you got to really harness those and ride them, or you get left behind as a creator and you stop growing because the algorithm no longer recommends you because it's no longer a hot thing. I would hate to be trapped into that game. Whereas with audio podcasting, it feels like I can actually build a small sustainable business that is just totally more focused on content. Because that's the other unsaid thing about the video is when you, at least if you care about production and you care about presentation, well, then you need to also kind of focus on the optics of the camera. Maybe you should be capturing your screen if you're talking about a story. Maybe you better have a switcher so you can switch between your hosts. And, now you're kind of focusing a little bit more on that than you are the actual content or the conversation or even the research. Because if you spend 20 minutes getting the video set up, that's 20 minutes you didn't spend getting research done or the show prepped, right? So there is a real cost to it. So I think I would, if I was starting it today, do video, but I'm not sure it would actually be the right decision.
Yeah. Once again, there's one of the things I think about, and it's kind of what's the best way to grow your show sort of deal is the recommendation is video, and I've seen it because you can have this kind of virality component which you don't get on audio. Audio is the long term slow grow. Whereas you can kick off, I guess, with something video related. But yeah, it is. And then it's kind of just like, for me, I look at it as a feeder mechanism for people who are watching the video to gradually try and get them to come over to the audio side of things. But I wonder how effective that is a lot of the time. And if I'm just creating, a bunch of people who are like looking out for the next video thing, and not ever coming across. It's kind of hard to say.
I, as a podcast listener, like it when I can catch the podcast on YouTube. Like your episode with Dave Jones, I finished on YouTube because I started in the car. We were driving down, but then we finished it just on YouTube while we were in the studio, and that was nice to be able to jump between like that. Another podcast I listened to earlier this morning, because I was just listening on my phone here in the studio as I was walking around. Even though they don't have any video, but they put it on YouTube, it's just their album art. I still listened on YouTube. I had the app up. It was actually New Pipe, not YouTube app. I like the New Pipe app. So I'm a bit of a hypocrite in this department. So we do publish our audio on YouTube, and we generate a waveform that visualizes the actual thing that we're saying and all that kind of stuff. But they don't do very well. I mean, compared to the podcast, I don't even look at the numbers on YouTube. I don't report them to advertisers. They're so insignificant that if I shut down the entire YouTube channel, it would literally not even affect the podcast, right? It would be unnoticed.
Yeah.
But I like it there for people that do want that platform, because for some people, YouTube's the platform they have access to on their TV or their mobile device, or their carrier gives them some sort of crappy data deal if they use YouTube or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. There's and like I said, there's certain ones. A bunch of your shows I did listen to on YouTube. I still have some in a playlist like way back, of just been meaning to get to, and because I typed something in, I found your show and was like, oh sweet, there's like the easiest way to get to it, versus trying to scroll through, find the episode in some of the apps. There's definitely the experience of that it has of some functionalities of the search, of populating things, of comments, cross app comments, and
or
maybe
really
one day that'll
even
happen. Yeah.
Just being in the web browser when you're researching a topic, you got 6 or 7 tabs open. YouTube's one of the tabs, right? So it's just it's nice to have it there as well. I get it, and I know there's some arguments out there about, well, you shouldn't be on every platform just because that's where the audience is, but at the same time, it's like YouTube's also the number 2 search engine in the world. So
yeah, correct. Do you have much thought about doing evergreen versus highly specific content? Because I was going through some of your old stuff, and I came across one which was Spider Oak versus BitTorrent Sync. And I just went, man, I've never heard either of these two things. I don't know if they're still around. This was from ages and ages ago. How much do you look back at old episodes and like enjoy the ones which were highly specific, and then kind of go like, oh wow, yeah, that was it just doesn't exist anymore?
Yeah, that is probably an example of an episode I might not do today. It's those tools though, BitTorrent Sync and Spider Oak, all those syncing tools. There's a whole category of them. Were very, very popular for a hot couple of years, and so it made sense. But you're right. Looking back at it a decade later, it's like, yeah, those don't even exist. Though it's kind of like a time capsule, right? Like if you wanted to go learn about BitTorrent Sync, you could. It was cool. We distributed our shows with BitTorrent Sync for a while, and I loved it. I thought it was the greatest because, like, I could throw all the clips in the folder too, and they could have all the clips we had used, and it was the album art. I'd put the album art in there. You could have the album art. You could get the file. And the great part is as soon as I was done encoding, I would just save it to the folder that could sync. So, like, if you got our shows over BitTorrent Sync, you got it, like, the moment it was done right into my file system. It was super slick. So I do kind of enjoy the nostalgia of going back and looking at that kind of stuff, because we've covered such a journey. But when you're doing content multiple times a week, you almost can't help but go current. To a degree.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
the evergreen stuff would be better, honestly. And I think we probably skew a little more evergreen now, but even still, like in Coder Radio, it's very current usually because there's a lot to be processing and chewing on. But then I look at Coder Radio and I think, well, now we have sort of this journal of when the App Store launched to today, and kind of our concerns and commentary along the entire way. And so in there is, we talked to these guys that were doing like this computer thing or whatever it was called, cloud. They turned out to be the co-founders of Docker that created, the container revolution. And we had them on Coda Radio when they were like, yeah, we're trying this thing. We think it could be a cool way to package up your applications and move it around. We're like, oh, yeah, that does seem like a good idea. And so to be able to just kind of chart that is pretty nice, even if it was sort of topical at the time, because .cloud isn't even around anymore. Now they're like Docker Inc. or whatever. But it's neat to have that in the record.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is kind of cool. I never thought of that aspect of the capturing of things. And yeah, well, you've captured a lot, so you'll never run out of stuff to look back upon and laugh or cringe or smile about.
A lot of cringing.
Yeah. Man, one of the things I really admire about you is kind of the ability to, I suppose, like predict the future somewhat. So you obviously nailed it with Linux and established chops with that. But also, I mean, even, you had a Bitcoin podcast in 2013. It's insane. It was called Plan B. There's one of those funny ones where it's like the internet, somewhat archives things. So even though I couldn't find the audio, on listen notes, you can still see the 20 episodes that it was and what you talked about in it. And so, like, there was things in there where you talked about Satoshi Dice getting sold and by Eric Voorhees, and this was before Mt. Gox as well. And you were talking about how, well, the note said you were talking about how the problem with Mt. Gox and the kind of centralization there. Where does this come from? Is it do you think it's like personality traits of yourself that you're really good at looking at the future, or is it kind of you're just so deep into the tech stuff that it's kind of like you see good ideas and it's like this is inevitably going to happen?
Yeah, it's got to be a little bit all of the above, right? Because when I was younger, I was so into the technology that it was just clear this was good technology. And then as I've gotten older and I've kind of stacked some wins as far as predictions, I've just kind of become a little bit more confident in my ability to call it. So it's sort of, now it's changed. Now it's more of a personality thing. But before, I think it was just that really early on, I was really skeptical of my opinion because nobody else around me would seem to agree about Linux or Bitcoin or podcasting even. Man, oh my God, podcasting. You want to talk about something that's even still awkward to this day. So what do?
Yeah.
I'm a podcaster. Oh. And you make money at that?
Yeah.
Yep, I make money at that. Really? And that's all you do? Yep. That's all I do. It's a crazy conversation still. People can't believe it's an actual job. And, I heard my dad explain it once as, he's kind of like a college radio station. I don't know if very many people listen, but it's kind of like college radio. Like, okay. And so a lot of my life was people telling me I'd made the wrong choice or something to that effect. And then kind of getting on the other end of those choices and having them work out. It's like, screw all you. I was right all along. So then that builds confidence a little bit. And so then you kind of become, but I think I am the first person, well, and I'm sure probably a lot of people relate to this because I'm not the only person like this, but when everybody starts going in the one direction, I start going, well, why are we all going in that direction? What's over here? And so I just have this natural kind of, I go against the grain. I tend to go really deep into research to an obsessive level where, maybe depends on the topic. Finances, it was about 2 years. Some things it's a couple of days, but I go really deep, read everything, every book I can find, watch every YouTube video. I mean, I'm watching YouTube videos constantly. If I'm not on air, I have something going. I am just completely consumed by something until I've really gotten to the bottom of it. And then I'm really confident in kind of my position. And then I will go seek out the most absolute savage takedowns and criticisms of what I've discovered and try to really, really battle test what I have figured out against what I can figure to be the most intelligent criticism on the topic. And then I'll challenge myself with that because I just enjoy that uncomfortableness of it. To me, it's just, I guess it's kind of entertaining. I just kind of enjoy that. And I don't really find a problem with like getting kind of rug pulled with an idea and discovering I've gone down the wrong path. And so I think that process that I've developed for both the show research and for personal things and just technology and all Bitcoin and all of that has given me a fundamental realization that people often just kind of go with the herd consensus on a topic, and it's not always correct. And sometimes they are. Sometimes there is a thing like crowd wisdom that is a respectable phenomenon, and sometimes people just didn't get it yet. And to kind of wrap this up, I remember about 3 months before the iPod came out, I worked at a bank, and I went to the investment center where we just got to ask questions as employees, free advice. And I walked in there, and I was doing some work, and I was there with my buddy who I rented a place with, and we said, "Hey, man," to one of the investment people, "we're both thinking about throwing in about $3,000 into Apple stock. It's around $8 right now, and we think they're going to go somewhere. We think they're on the precipice. Steve Jobs is back now. CyMac stuff is looking pretty good. We think they're going somewhere. We're thinking about putting $6,000 total into Apple stock." "Oh, don't do that. No, don't buy any tech stock. Don't invest in tech. The last thing you want to do right now is invest in tech." And this is, dot-com boom kind of echoes. I'm like, "Oh, really?" You're like, "Oh, yeah, don't. Apple, they're not going to be around in a decade. Don't invest in Apple." Like, "Oh, I really have the feeling like they're going somewhere." "No, save your money. Save your money. Go put that in GM." Man, right? Like, we look back at that. This was like a couple of months or so before they launched the iPod, and they have been on a rocket ship ever since. It obviously had seen something there that they didn't see. And I realized that guy was an expert. That guy had been at that job for 30 years and was considered like one of the top guys at the bank. And he missed that. So that just was a life lesson that I think has stuck with me, to trust my own research and my intuition on stuff. And then kind of just unfortunately stick to it, and then eat a crap sandwich for a few years until everybody else figures it out. Like the whole microphones and headphones thing on YouTube is a total non-issue now. And I took a crap sandwich for years. I didn't even know that was a thing. Oh, yeah. Constant criticism. And it really got to us. It really was like, so we tried these Countryman microphones. Yeah. And it just didn't sound as good. And of course, the audio downloads were our primary audience. And we're getting all this criticism from the video audience on these microphones and headphones. And it's like we were onto something there. We could have stuck with that path, and we probably would have developed that into a decent following on YouTube if we've been doing it for the last 10 years. But, we didn't. And so sometimes I don't always just stick with it. But sometimes, as you get older, you kind of learn, well, okay, this one I think I'm right. I'm just going to play it out and see how it goes. And I feel like a little bit with the boost. Right? It's kind of opened me up for criticism from my friends who can kind of leverage it as a competitive advantage. Well, we're not going to talk about any of that crypto crap over here.
Yeah.
We don't talk crypto. If you want a Linux podcast that doesn't talk crypto, you come over here, right? And so they'll take a little bit of short-term gain to kind of get the disaffected folks who don't see the bigger picture, but they're going to have a long-term loss because they're basically enticing an audience that is set in their ways on a particular topic, which means there's no room for them to move ever in the future. So if they did want to embrace something like Boost or some other mechanism, they've now just sort of self-selected for an audience that isn't here for it.
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah. And you got the disaffected people as well, Is that the kind of audience that you really, the ones who are the vocal complainers? It's funny, you want some pushback, you want someone to be able to tell you when your audio is not sounding so great, or if you're doing this, simple thing wrong, or you're just acting like a jackass on this particular episode or whatnot. But yeah, geez, you don't want an audience who are hair trigger ready to criticize at any little given thing. What you were talking about before was really reminiscent of the letting your ideas die so that you don't have to. The kind of like the idea battleground. If I jump over this bridge or this gap, is this worth the validation I might get from friends versus the risk of dying, sort of deal?
Well, you'll never get the validation. You take all the risk and you never get the validation, because by the time everybody else catches up, it's an obvious foregone conclusion.
Yeah,
which, of course we're doing it this way.
Everyone's kind of forgotten about it. What are some of the ideas that you did get wrong, out of interest? Like what are some of the and what were like the identifying things that you think were related to that, as to a wrong prediction?
I mean, at the core of it, I think it's probably the shows we did, right? Like the gaming stuff. That just wasn't, looking back, it just doesn't make sense. The audience wasn't really there at Jupiter Broadcasting for us to talk about niche games. It's just silly thinking about it now. But it took me a while to kind of come to that kind of conclusion, that kind of realization. But as far as like predictions go and bets, I can't really think of anything.
Nothing too big. Or it like died before it got to that point, which is I suppose what that your process is probably the more important point, which is, like you said, the deep technical research followed by seeking out things. I try and do that as well. I went through a phase of just looking at all the anti-Bitcoin, anti-crypto stuff that I could find. And most of it was, it's this hard bit where you're trying to give it weight, even though you think it's wrong at the off start. It's this weird bit where you're trying to like mentally battle yourself to open up your own head, your own ideas, and it is
that's
hard.
The uncomfortable part.
And then you listen to like Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger on Bitcoin, and you're like, damn, these guys have it so wrong.
Yeah, they're not doing any of that work. You can tell they're not doing any of that. The fascinating thing about Bitcoin is I am still very actively looking for a criticism that is correct. I think, even the energy criticism gets it so wrong and loses so much perspective and scale. Like, I think it's ridiculous that we even talk about Bitcoin's energy use, but nobody's bringing up OpenAI or all of these different AI initiatives that are powered by GPUs. Or here's just a funny anecdote. We have this auto parts chain called Advanced Auto Center. And they got a lot of stores, but they have 70 data centers just to run their auto parts store. And they have the most primitive auto parts inventory system, because we have one here in our town. I've seen it. And nobody talks about the energy usage of that. Which I just think it's interesting that so much emphasis gets put on the Bitcoin energy usage, when what it's doing is it's taking a real world useful thing, electricity, that is quantifiably valuable, provably useful, and it is converting that real, physical, provably valuable thing into a provably valuable digital asset that is unique and scarce. It's that energy doesn't go away. It's converted into a unique Bitcoin. It's converted into something that can be stored digitally. And that is part of what gives Bitcoin its value. Unlike Ethereum and other things that are like staking based and just kind of create out of thin air that really have no value, the fact that you have to have physical mining equipment, and at this point it's a business with staff and operational costs and real estate costs and electricity costs, those things are going to create those individually unique Satoshis. So they inherently have value because they use electricity. We're converting electricity into a scarce digital asset. It's the first time we've ever been able to do this, and people haven't even wrapped their head around it. And the energy use is a good thing. It's one of the best features about Bitcoin is its electricity usage, and people don't get it. They just don't get it. And the takedowns don't even kind of like wrap their head around, like, when you are talking about Bitcoin's power use, and you got to talk about the bank power use. Like, I worked for a bank with 40 branches. We had 120 servers running 24/7 to facilitate that. And that's just one tiny regional bank. It's like one tiny bank. So I find all these takedowns, like when they usually are going after things like that, there's sort of like really kind of focused in on kind of this narrative that is pretty easy to break apart. And I think it's just because if you only kind of come at something from one angle, like its energy use, and you don't understand the entire thing that they're trying to solve with Bitcoin, maybe it's just kind of a trap you can get into.
Yeah, and like I was saying in the show notes for Plan B, there was a bit in there where you were talking about the energy use back in 2013, and it was like, oh my god, it's people are worried about how it uses the equivalent of like 13,000 American homes or something. It was such a tiny bit compared to now, and it's like, well, I mean, I don't know. People just like to complain, I guess. And
yeah. Well, it's you know what else? The energy market is ludicrous, and it's not how you'd expect it to operate. You wouldn't think that you need like all this generative capacity that needs to be paid for in order to have capacity that's available when people want to turn on their air conditioners. You'd think they could just turn that up and down when they need it. You know, rev the motor up, rev the motor down. You don't really understand as a consumer how any of this works and how Bitcoin can be used to incentivize a renewable-based grid, and how it can be used to capture methane off-gassing and convert just methane we're dumping into the air, 100% dumping, one of the most serious greenhouse gases out there. We're just dumping into the air, and you can put a little cap on that, feed it into a generator, and you can mine Bitcoin. And you can take that stranded energy and actually produce something that is valuable that can then be digitally transferred over a cellular network. Right? Yeah. It's just, it's such a good thing. And everybody that wants electric cars and everybody that wants electric heat, they don't even know it right now, but they need Bitcoin to get there. But they'll figure it out. They need Bitcoin mining specifically to get there. But because it's so complex, the topic of the energy market and how we do all of that, it's so complex that if people are just told, hey, this thing over here that you don't think's really doing anything, it's not really worth anything, that, you know, how you don't think this cryptocurrency is worth anything, do you know they're using a bunch of electricity? And people just panic and they lose their mind. But yeah, I guess that's human nature. So just going back to your original question, just kind of understanding that and just having the fortitude to be like, slow your roll, I think helps sort of wait out those headwinds when you make a prediction and you just have to wait for it to play out.
Yeah. And what do you think it is that the average person misses about these things? Like, because I wonder, you know, if I'm this wrong about. Look, I mean, I'm probably not the best example for this because I really try and not criticize, you know, especially like low value criticism where I talk shit on the internet or anything like that. You know, that's not really up my alley. But I wonder how much what's something where I'm completely wrong on, and in 10, 15 years time look back and just like, duh, that was so obvious. How did I miss that? And what do you think categorizes that kind of the missing of that mindset that maybe the average person might have, or something like that? Is it that closed-mindedness? Is it like the not doing the work? Is it the I don't know, just straight up like, you know, IQ, or not or being too willing to follow the trends, the input sources, you know?
Obviously could be all of those things. I think maybe the biggest factor, if we were to keep it on Bitcoin or podcasts even, is it was the same problem. People didn't really understand why they needed it. Why do I need a podcast? I got radio, right? I got CDs. Why do I need a podcast? I don't need to listen to some guy. Why do I need Bitcoin? I got a debit card. I got digital money. I don't ever use cash. Why do I pay with my phone? Why do I need it? Why do I need a cryptocurrency? It's, for a lack of a better term, it's because they're coming from a position of privilege. The existing system, whatever it might be, maybe it's media system, maybe it's financial system, it works for them. They haven't really had any problems. They're doing all right. Things are maybe not going great, but that's how it's always been. You know, they've always lived in a society where 8 people in a room decide the price of money all around the world. Like, that's always been the way it has for everybody. We've always lived in a world where a Federal Reserve manipulates the dollar, and then every country in the West, at least, is impacted by that. And that's just the way it's been, and the central bankers smooth it out, and we've never really thought anything differently. Your debit card works. You're getting paid. Your bills are getting paid. You're buying food. What's the problem? Right? The problem is, of course, people don't actually realize that it's debasing, that inflation is actually a killer, all these things, right? And that it's fiat money that's printed at infinite, that's created by the issuance of debt, which means there isn't actually enough dollars to pay back all the debt in existence because you create dollars through debt. So how do you pay back something when you're creating the dollars? Like, all of that people don't realize because it's all working. Well, it has worked. For the last few years, especially since COVID, I think the cracks are starting to show more and more. At least here in the States, I don't know about you guys, but like if you want to pull out $2,000-$3,000 of cash, or even a couple $100s of cash, you're going to get a whole litany of questions. What are you planning to do with that, sir? Why do you need cash on hand for that? If you do $10,000 or more, that gets tracked and reported to the federal government, and they're getting really serious about locking down. So it's starting not to work. Some people, immigrants and others, also can't be banked. When Brent visits from Canada, he can't go open up a banking account down here and have some local cash to buy things in. You just can't do that. Right. So there's all these things that make the financial system a little less acceptable for each one of us over time. And depending on where you're living in the world, it's very unacceptable.
Yeah.
And if you're in the West, it's not so bad yet. It's getting there, but you're kind of like the frog in the boiling pot. You don't even realize what's going on. So why not just keep using it? It's fine. Things are costing more, but, it's the cost of the war in Ukraine. So what else can I do? Right. And they don't even think about they're not trained. They're not trained by the education system to think about hard assets and to think about real estate and gold and what makes something a scarce hard asset versus what makes something crap fiat money. None of that's taught. Of course, rich people teach that to their children and teach them the difference between hard assets and crap money and all of that. But I don't think most people get taught any of that kind of stuff. Most people, their biggest asset that they own is likely their home. Yeah. And that's kind of the middle class lifestyle here. And that's getting harder and harder to do. And so I think for people that are trying to find a way to build wealth that don't have real estate, then they start looking for an alternative and they start considering something else. Or people that are content creators that have been looking for a peer-to-peer digital system to send value that is completely uncontrolled by any one corporation. We're a little more inclined to consider it. We have a crack in that privilege. We have some reason to look outside the system. I got into Bitcoin 14 years ago, practically, because I thought networked computing was one of the biggest innovations the internet would bring us. Offline network computing, and I thought the blockchain was a great way to organize some of that work. And that was initially what got me into Bitcoin. But then what brought me back into it, why I restarted talking about Bitcoin more on the shows and why I got in with the Bitcoin Dad Pod, is because I looked at it from an economic standpoint. I started to learn about economics, the way the Federal Reserve operates, the way money is issued, what makes something a hard asset. And that really is what kind of made me fully committed. And so I think it was that crack that made me like, what's going on here? What's going on with the economy, right? Why isn't this system working? That I actually spent the time to really learn the economics of it all. But if everything had been working great, if I was making $1 million a year, feeling really good, paying all my bills, comfortable as heck, I don't know if I would have been as inclined. I would have said, the advertising model's working great. Everybody's living comfortable. The kids are getting everything they want. Why bother?
Yeah, it's those pain points that might be one of the biggest things, actually, like leaning in to the pain or the problem. I've kind of been on a very similar journey for the last 2 years of learning about inflation and economics, and I really kind of wish I hadn't. I'm not sure I'm because a lot of it is just that baffling, like, what, I remember my dad, like amazing person. He's done a lot of successful things in life, and I'm so glad I've had him. But he was raised in like a Keynesian worldview, and I just remember just talking to him about, what is inflation? Like how can the government print money? And I was just trying to like get to the heart of if they just print money, how is that not diluting it? All the other money that's in the system.
How do they get to print something for free that I have to work my butt off to earn?
Yeah,
that doesn't seem fair.
And we were debating this kind of fundamental concept because he was saying, it kind of gets back into the government and gets destroyed. I'm like, whoa, like, how does it get destroyed? Where does the destroying happen? What is debt? How can every country in the world be in debt? And if we all square it up and owe money to who to who, how does it all equal out? Or does, it's that kind of just, you're like, it's almost like you're battling against the universe or something, because it's kind of crap that humans have created and it's not real. And so it's
a micro universe. We have created it. Yeah. And there is a mathematical inevitability to the end result And that is one of the heaviest things that I have to deal with from time to time. The Bitcoin Dad and I, we sit down before the show often and we'll have an hour or two long conversation where I'm just working out like the inevitability of all of this. And it is heavy stuff. It's massive, right? Because we have, especially here in the States, we have crossed a point of no return with our debt and our governance structure and all of it. It's just the math of it is an inevitability that I find almost overwhelming sometimes. And I grok what you mean, where I almost wish I didn't understand it, except for the fact that in the past, like in the 2008 crash, when I wasn't paying attention, I got really screwed. And I feel like the best way to protect myself, orient the business, and protect my family, and sort of position ourselves to weather it is to be aware of it, where ultimately I am optimistic longer term. I am, 10 or so years down the road, 2030 something, early 2030s. I'm optimistic about things turning around, but I am not before that. I'm pessimistic about probably the next decade.
Yeah.
In a major way, in a way I've never been before. And in part, it's been enabled. This pessimism has been enabled because of the clear understanding I have of how it's all working. Which is, when you discover how it all works and that makes you more upset, that's a bad thing.
Yeah. And it's, I used to have this in the mining as in coal mining industry when I worked in it. And that was just, so I did logistics. That was kind of like my day job as a mining engineer. And, basically all my time was spent on a spreadsheet trying to we're getting this coal out of this portion here. That means this bit needs to be dug up at this time. Got these commitments via rail and stuff. And it was just always, there would be these situations where you would literally you're digging holes. You're literally digging this hole that you can't get out of. And you end up having to do some really stupid shit, like buy back your own coal to mix it with more coal that you have to satisfy this customer. And it's just so stupid. And you go like, how did we get to here? What? And this would happen, not all the time. It's like a periodic thing, maybe once a year or once every 6 months or something. And it was just this almost inevitable thing. You don't even realize you're kind of going down this path until that pit over there is starting to fill up with water. We kind of need that coal soon. It'll be fine. Yeah, it was the not the funnest aspect of humanity of trying to figure out the crazy crap we do.
It's not us at our best, is it? And it seems to be worse when we get into large groups. And I think one of the interesting things is a lot of businesses and products will survive, right? Like Apple internally is a mess, but they still manage to ship iPhones on a regular schedule. So some companies seem to figure out how to still harness it. Google, I think, doesn't do such a great job as an example, but they still manage to survive. When I was part of another company trying to make podcasts, it was a constant battle to keep focus on the shows. A larger organization just has so many other goals and things and priorities and internal machinations that aren't about the product. There are so many people involved that don't even know the product, don't know the customer, don't do anything that directly relates to making the product directly. And when you add more and more of those people, I think some types of businesses and products can survive that, and I think others can't. And I think podcasts and content creation of this type, the independent media type, is an example of a kind that can't survive that. The shows suffered immediately. And it was a huge battle to kind of, I felt like I was dragging this weight behind me to go do the shows, even though we were trying to run harder than ever. And it's just human nature, I suspect. And so what I kind of took away from that was for independent media like podcasts, I don't know about large video productions or television shows or radio programs,
movies,
but for independent podcasts and content creation, I think it's lean and mean. I think it's a small team at best, a family business, that kind of thing. I think that's what works best because everybody is focused on the product. You cannot afford to do it any other way. If you're running lean and mean, everyone that's there, they have something that impacts the product, which in this case would be the podcast. And I think value for value also kind of encourages that kind of lean and mean operation. And with the splits and everything, it's all out there in the open. So you know exactly how much my co-hosts are making, you know how much I'm making, you know what the network take is, you know how much we're giving to the index, to Podverse, to Fountain FM. It's all out there in the RSS feed, completely transparent, which is another thing all these businesses don't have, is they're completely opaque from us. And with value for value, especially if you put the amounts in the show like we do, it is completely transparent. And it just feels like a more sustainable model that won't have that kind of entropy that the other models have, where you have all this horizontal growth and all these people get added that aren't related to the product and all this opaqueness about the money. And you know, when you're kind of a business like that, then you're always looking for new ways to bring in a lot more money. You're always looking for bigger and bigger money. So you're also looking for these huge contracts and stuff. And I think that it makes for, you know, like the kind of stuff the New York Times or NPR makes, which is fine. There's definitely an audience for it, but it's not independent. It's not raw. It's not like the spirit of the internet.
Yeah. I after working in a company for a while, and look, Rio Tinto, where I worked, it was probably one of the better workplaces. Is, you know, internal politics drama was to a minimum. It was kind of like, it was good in a way because no one wanted to be there, so everyone was kind of like slightly miserable. So we're all on the same page.
Equal levels of misery.
Yeah. I mean, no one really wants to be out at a mine site, like away from the family, away from people.
Yeah, I suppose so.
It's not the healthiest of environments, and that's why you see all the rampant drug use and depression, suicide that happens in fly-in, fly-out communities and whatnot here in Australia, and I assume in other areas of the world. But yeah, that I think just the meager experience I had there of dealing with, like you said, people who aren't connected to the final end product, or where it is that kind of horizontal outgrowing has made
maybe they've never dug, they've never touched the product. Yeah, they've never, or in my case, they've never made a podcast or whatever.
Yeah, I just don't want to. I don't want to deal with like groups of people like that. I think that's I think there's a lot of really weird stuff that happens when just too many humans get together. It's better to have a slightly less, for sure. You were talking about I suppose like the internet before and the impact that has had. And one of the things I see with, you know, Bitcoin and AI and the next thing is that it's going to be comparable to the internet. And so when I grew up, I was born in 1992, and so from when I can remember, I kind of had it. I had access to, you know, Google and just being able to type stuff in and having access to a computer. Are these things actually comparable? Will they have the same effect you think that the internet has had?
Well, it seems silly because they all require the internet. So how can you say they've had the same impact if they all run on TCP/IP? Like they wouldn't even exist without the internet. So I'm not sure. That's a hard one. You know, my experience of the internet was slow and tedious, and it took forever to roll out. Right, my first few years were BBSs and modems. It was remarkable how slow it was. I can't even believe I had, you know, 96 baud modem. 9.6 kilobytes a second maybe is what I got. 9 kilobytes a second. And then later when I got a 14.4 modem, I could do 14 kilobytes a second. But of course, it would never actually do that. So I'd really get my 9 kilobits I should have been getting with my 9600 baud. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Now websites are multiple megabytes. And so when people say it's going to be like the internet, I think, so you mean it's going to take 20 years before normies start using it? Like, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I remember still vividly the moment I was out at a restaurant, like at a booth, at like a Denny's type thing. And I remember the booth next to us, somebody said a web URL or some tech term. And I had never heard another human use a tech term out in public before. And I was like, oh my God, it's happening. I remember the moment. The internet's happening. It's coming. Everybody's going to be aware of it. Oh my God. and it just still took forever. And we still really don't use it as well as we could. So I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. If anything has the potential, it would be Bitcoin, right? Because what you're talking about is taking gold and putting it over email. I mean, if you just look at Bitcoin that way, if it just did that, if it just let you take gold and send it to somebody electronically and they could receive the gold securely and 100% verifiably, that would be a massive innovation, right? But Bitcoin is also a settlement network. It is potentially a contract network. It is a payments network. It is a transaction network, right? So it's all these other things, kind of like the internet is a media network, a text network, right? So it has the potential to also do the kind of disruption that the internet did, because obviously there are massive stakeholders in different financial, like just look at MasterCard and Visa and some of the banks. Their role would be to interoperate on an open protocol, on an open network, instead of having their entire fiefdoms. So it would be disruption at the scale that would make Uber look quaint if it were to actually do that disruption. But I think it's more likely to be somewhere in the middle. It'll probably be incorporated into society, much like we've incorporated other high-value assets. The state will retain its power by creating its own money and running its own banks or commercial banks. We'll have that kind of stuff, but Bitcoin will just be incorporated into the system. It'll be sold by major providers like Fidelity, instead of places like, I don't know, Coinbase. I mean, maybe Coinbase will be around, but it'll be kind of like something that you buy on NASDAQ. It'll be that kind of asset. And I don't know if that's going to revolutionize the world or not, but it probably has the potential of anything else I've ever worked with. Like, I wouldn't have ascribed Linux that, but Linux has also been a revolutionary change, a general technology platform that has the ability to do all the things like networking and task switching. And like, that was stuff that you just didn't get for free until Linux came along. You had to build a proprietary OS or go with a proprietary OS that could do those things. And then Linux was like, yeah, you need TCP/IP built in. You need firewall capability. You need to run multiple processes. Yeah, you want to do virtualization? Sure, we can do that. You want to work with this storage technology? Okay, no problem. Yeah, write the code. That was a game changer. But I don't know if it was as revolutionary as the internet was, because it's how we do everything now. We work, we communicate. I mean, this call is facilitated by the internet that we couldn't have done before. This would have been a long distance phone call, and it would have been crappy audio before.
Yeah.
So how could it actually be the size and scale of the internet? I just don't see it. But I think it just underscores how incredible it is to be alive during the internet's origination, right? Like, that's what's going to be special about our timeline. We'll look back, our future generations will look back and be like, wow, that was the very beginning days of the internet. Wow. Now here I'm on Mars and I'm connected,
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point you make, where it is, the internet, because when I hear people making this analogy, they're saying it as in like the internet started in 1997 or something.
Yeah.
so that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that before. So it is going to be slow and annoying for a while. And I mean, I really hope I have this kind of looking back period where I was copying a bunch of, so for those who don't know, in this show, I'm going to get your Lightning address after this, and I'll put you in as a 30% split. And generally what I do is I have 10% for developers. And so I was putting in, like Martin from Podfriend, Mitch from Podverse, et cetera. And I was manually copying like their Lightning addresses, and I needed to kind of do it on my phone, and I had no real quick and easy way to get it from my desktop onto my phone, copy it, get it into Fountain, because I'm using their shim. And so I ended up just copying. It was quicker for me just to copy the random text, the 30 numbers, mixture of numbers and letters. So I'm just there on my phone, randomly like looking up, comparing down and off, and I really hope this is one of the times where in like 5-10 years time it's just like, god damn, I remember doing that. I remember manually copying Lightning addresses. And
us Linux users, we enjoy this tool called KDE Connect, which might be available for your platform of choice. And one of the neat things you can do is share the clipboard between your phone and the computer. So if I copy something on the phone or on the computer, it's immediately on the other
Oh,
clipboard.
that's cool. Yeah.
That's a handy
Nice.
tool.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. There's I don't know if you've heard this, but me saying this before, but I'm kind of a reluctant geek. I actually don't enjoy that much playing with things. I really looked at getting a Raspberry Pi for a bit and setting up a Lightning node. I think I made the right decision for me not to do that. It would have caused just so much mental anxiety, and it was the right decision not to kind of play with that and whatnot. So I'm not on the cutting forefront of all of these things. So I'm sure there's so much I do, which is just there's probably a tool out there that could solve it.
I don't know.
But then
knowing,
it's
knowing that limit's a good thing, right? Yeah, you got to. Not only do you have to spend the time to do the research to find that tool, but then knowing that if it's not quite your forte, I think is pretty critical because, man, it stinks when you're having node issues and it's an episode where like you're getting a bunch of great boosts and people are trying to throw in their support and that you can't keep the node online for whatever reason. Like that happened to me a couple of weeks ago, or maybe not even that long. I had a bunch of inbound liquidity problems. I got those solved. And as soon as I got all that solved and the big boosts were coming in, and it was like, yes, we did it. I got it solved just in time. Comcast took my internet down and for upgrades.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so my node was down all day and I couldn't get the boost anyways. And that was hard. That stunk. So there is downsides to the self-hosting sometimes.
Yeah. And I've solved that by mostly just having multiple different wallets across multiple different areas. So Satoshi Stream with Fountain, with GetAlby, and when there's a new easy Lightning wallet that I can use, I'll probably get a fourth or fifth as well, just to spread it out so it's not all in just one central location, for sure.
Yeah, inevitably you'll have to probably investigate like a wallet solution or something if you want to save them. I've been experimenting with various ways to get them out of Alby and spend them or save them, depending on what I'm trying to do, because I really like Alby. But Alby doesn't make it very easy to get your sats out of Alby outside the Lightning Network. Obviously, you can send it anywhere that supports Lightning, but not a lot of traditional Bitcoin desktop wallets, maybe none, except for maybe one, support Lightning. So getting it somewhere where you can save it long term can be a little tricky. I've been playing with that recently. It's doable. You hop apps basically.
Yeah. And there's the thing, you just there's the reluctant part on me, which is like, all right, well, this is important, so I will spend the time, even though it's kind of uncomfortable and not what I love to do. I'll spend the time and get this stuff. But yeah, just figuring out that boundary point of like, no mas, like I'm not going to do more. It's
yeah, it's good. And save your energy for other things that you do feel a bit more passionate about. And Alby's great anyway. So
yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't want to leave it in there forever, but it's great, right?
I have nothing bad to say about them. It's for what it does, it does well. Yeah. Have you used AI much at all, Chris? I know you're on the kind of cutting edge on many of these things. Have you found any like use cases where it's kind of like, wow, this is really going to change the way I do things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a huge change. It feels to me just like another tool that makes production a little more straightforward. We've been basically, since it went public, we've been using Stable Diffusion to generate the images for our live streams because I don't feel like making a silly face, and I don't feel like paying for licensed stock photography. So I just have the AI generate it for a live stream that a few hundred people are going to watch. It's like not a big deal. So it's great for that kind of stuff. And then, your ChatGPT type stuff, I find it really useful for, here's a story. And I tell it, what I'd like you to do is I basically give it the prompt, summarize this story into bullet points, prefix each bullet point with an emoji that represents the context of that bullet point, and then format it in Markdown. And so then what I'll do is I'll grab that output and I'll put it into a list of stories I'm considering. Which ones should I go read and really dig up all the sides of it, try to contact somebody for comment, and because all of that takes so long. So what I can do now with ChatGPT is essentially I'll give it the stories I'm looking at, read its summary, and then decide if I'm going to proceed further or not. So it's not really much more of a tool than just identifying if a story is interesting or not because it'll summarize it for me with emojis and then text. And when you're looking at a dozen stories, it works pretty well. But that kind of thing I find pretty valuable. And then the other thing that I use it for every day is I give it the entire show notes document. And I say, take the most important keywords and put them into a comma separated list for me. And then it generates me a big old thing of tags or keywords, however you want to call them. And then I can put that like on, the platform when they get posted, whatever platform it might be that wants keywords. And I don't have to sit there and go like, well, we talked about Linux and we talked about GNOME, right? It just does it all for me. Saves me a little bit of time there.
Yeah, there's a couple of ideas there which I might even be able to use. What would be interesting is if it actually kind of bifurcates the text medium in many ways. I've never been great at reading stuff online. I actually really hate reading stuff on my computer, long articles and things like this. And it'd be really cool to see if there was just none of this kind of middle ground where it's something that you think might be as worth reading or as interesting, but it's kind of like, it'll take 5-10 minutes to read, but how much value can you actually get from something that's only worth 5 or 10 minutes of reading? You're not gonna get deep. So it'd be maybe great if we just have the two opposite ends, the extremely highly detailed bullet point, which is creating stuff from much larger, like, books worth of information or really, really long articles where people have spent the time to figure things out. Because, yeah, I don't know. Every kind of like, I read a lot, Chris. I've got, book reviews and whatnot. And just in general, if anything is kind of less than 100 pages, it's short stories, for example, even compilations or collections of short stories. I've tried a few of them over the time, and they've never really done anything for me. It's always a book which has a bit of meat to it, which is the ones that I enjoy. There's just something about these smaller short form, 5 minutes to 20 minutes worth of reading, which is it doesn't do much for me.
It's been a useful tool for sussing out what is worth spending the time to read. What should I like either send to a device to read later, because I also hate reading on the screen, or what can I just process right now? And then I have this tagging system for different shows, and then it goes into a feed for that show. So it's a helps with inbound. But then specifically for Linux Action News, we write a lot for that show. It's not 100% script based, but names, dates, companies, all the stuff you need when you're reporting on something that is facts that you don't necessarily just remember off the top of your head. We write all that out, and it is a useful tool for getting that process started. So if I say I'm writing about Red Hat, and I know that Red Hat has a new CEO, Matt Hicks, but when did Matt Hicks first start at Red Hat? Well, he actually started at Red Hat 17 years ago or whatever it is, right? And so I can have it help me start writing that paragraph, and then it gets me through that writer's block of how do I start here. And then I usually go, oh, well, that's crap, but I'll rewrite it. And then it's exactly what I want. So it's useful for that kind of show production stuff. It's just trying to get something down to get me going.
Yeah.
Then I can fill it out from there. That's huge time saver. I mean, huge time saver just doing that. So it's, people are all freaked out about the dangers and the safety and misinformation. They're not that good. It's dumb. I can tell when people use ChatGPT to generate tweets to reply, and it's like, it's not that great. And it's not that big of a threat. It's a useful tool in that you can throw anything at it prompt-wise, and it generally understands what you mean. I mean, the fact that I can say, prefix an emoji and select an emoji that's based on the context of that bullet point, that's a neat thing to be able to tell the computer to do, and it just does it. That doesn't mean it's going to create fake videos of President Biden or something that's going to convince me. That's just not happening. So I think people are a little hyperbolic right now about AI and about how it's going to be the next revolution. And it's still very early, right? This AI stuff is really incremental. That's what my experience has been. I mean, I was telling you about that that guy that played Age of Empires. He's been doing it. He's been covering it forever. And so I went, and then YouTube suggested I watch a making of Age of Empires from 1997 or whatever it was. And I'm watching the making of Age of Empires. And you know what they spend 15 minutes talking about in this video from 1997 in this 4:3 grainy VHS video that's been reposted on YouTube? AI. They spend 15 minutes talking about their AI in the game and how proud they are of their AI and how they can dial up the AI and turn down the AI and how it creates these new gaming experiences. It's like, oh,
Wow.
okay, I recognize this.
Yeah.
From 97 or something.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Well, my impression of it is very, very similar. It's a lot of hyperbole. And I mean, all of it, from what I can tell at the moment, is, you know, the big breakthrough has just been these large language models. And one of the things I kind of know about is like learning another language and whatnot, and just how intricate and hard it is to get the nuances of another language. Like if you just even like something like swearing, for example, in Spanish is just an absolute minefield of trying to get right. And there's one I always like to repeat this, which is if you start swearing in another language, you invariably become a little bit more racist, a little bit more misogynistic, a little bit more of an asshole, because you just don't understand the whole context of when you can and can't use these words, and how you can say this to a friend and you can't say that. And I've got a Brazilian friend here in Brisbane who's learning English, and he's relatively good, and we're teaching him all the swear words because it's funny. And the ways that he gets it wrong sometimes, like, dude, you can't say that. Like, that's no, you can't use that.
Yeah.
And I'm just skeptical about how they'll take over the world, because it's so much hard. Like, there's so much effort required to get humans to understand one another. Like, for me to communicate in Spanish, it required years and years of just like hard slog and grind for me to not only learn all the words, but then, you know, a lot of the context behind some of them. And I'm still I'm like at I don't know what level it'd be, like B2 or A1, not even close to fluency. And it is just a painful process to try and inch up that ladder. So yeah, I'm skeptical of whether they'll be able to be so convincing that they'll fool humans, and you know, they'll create such compelling misinformation or whatever, that will be inevitably drawn into whatever it is they're saying.
Right.
Yeah, I'm skeptical.
And I'm not even sure if I buy the argument that they're developing so fast now that it's just a matter of time until they're generating their own things that really do fool us. I don't particularly buy it. I think we've kind of hit a ceiling for a little bit. This could, I mean, I say that with, there's so much obvious room for improvement, right? More integration with services, better ways to train these things. Like, there's so many areas they're going to improve them, but we're not going to get like the Jarvis kind of AI where it's sitting there and it's kind of like busting your balls about stuff, and you're joking back and forth, and it's kind of a bit of a jerk, and, you know, like, it has a whole vibe. Like, that's not gonna, I mean, it's just all fake. It's all an act. It's a parlor trick a little bit. It's a bit of a smoke and mirrors what they do, right? Because that's how all this works right now, and that's okay. It's fine if you recognize that and recognize it can be flawed. It's, like I said, it's a tool I'm using pretty much on the daily now. So they got something. It's just not. It's not worth all these like one world government regulatory bodies that like Sam Altman is suggesting and things like that.
Yeah.
It's just it's way too far.
Yeah, for sure. Let's jump on to maybe something a little bit more fun, man. The travel, and you talked about you were hoping in the future to go to different places and whatnot. Have you traveled much outside of the US? Because I know you've got the RV, so you've probably done extensively in the US.
Canada.
Because you're going to
couple
El
of days in
Salvador
Mexico
at the end of this year, right?
I am. That's probably one of the biggest. I'm going to spend a week or so in El Salvador in November. That'll be, besides Canada and Mexico, that'll be probably my biggest. And then I inevitably I have to get over to Europe. I have to get over there. I've promised the audience for years. Just have to make it happen. It's just budget and timing wise, it's really tricky, especially with 3 young kids.
Yeah.
But that's Yeah, for me, I love a road trip. So I have really been biased towards the States, and we have. I mean, it's not doing as well as it was when I got the RV years ago, but we have a really robust highway system. We have lots of rest stops and lots of facilities for RVers. So it is, other than the gas, it is my absolute favorite way to travel because you got all your own stuff. You got your closet. You don't have to pack. You got your bathroom, you got your sink, you got your toiletries, you got your fridge with all your stuff in it. And it's just a fantastic way to travel, especially for me who wants to work from the road and have recording gear with me and all that kind of stuff. So I love that. And if I were like, a big time rich guy, I'd probably just put the RV on a boat and take it to the countries that have roads big enough for it.
Wow. Yeah, that would be yeah, I'd like to see you try doing that in Mexico.
Yeah. No, I think I'll have to get, one day, maybe a truck camper kind of a thing, a smaller, more nimble rig. Maybe I can take that through
Yeah,
some of the smaller
hashtag van
roads.
life, getting into.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, have you ever tried the smaller, more compact version? Because yours is like, for those who haven't seen, Chris' RV is huge. It's like the bus
Yeah.
sized type ones.
Yeah, it's a bus. We tried SUV camping a little while ago. Like it was even kind of cold out still, but the wife and I wanted to see what would happen if we took our SUV because the back seats fold down. And we folded one time we were just loading it with something because we use it mostly for hauling crap and hauling kids. And so we put the back seats down. And we're like, yeah, you could put a bed back here and we could camp in this. And the wife was like, yeah, let's try it. So we put a bunch of cushions in there and went out into the woods because we have ample camping opportunities here in the Pacific Northwest. And it was miserable. It was horrible. It was the worst night of sleep in a while, and felt so cramped. Smacked my head on the ceiling multiple times. Just like so not nice compared to like I didn't even think about like what do I do with my shoes? I didn't even think about that. Or like what do I do once I take off my pants and my shoes and then I gotta go like take a leak first thing in the morning? Like
Yeah.
what do I do about that? Like horrible. Felt like a caveman. I think I could actually refine the idea though, and I think I could iterate on it because I love the idea of a nimble vehicle that I could just jump in and go to an event. If it's an event that's on the West Coast, I could drive to it, and there's lots of Linux events, and so it'd be great to have something where on the way down I could just sleep in the vehicle and save on the hotel costs.
Yeah, I've been looking at traveling again. So I went for a big travel in 2018, 2019. It was about 14 months through Latin America. A fair bit of that in Mexico as well. I really, really enjoyed Mexico. It's a beautiful place. And one of the things I noticed when I came back home and I spent 2 weeks at home, I just went, whoa, I have not had a really good sleep for the last year and a bit. It's been,
Yeah.
I had some places where I was, I'd rent my own Airbnb or get my own apartment and just, be able to just lay my shit out on the ground and not have to worry about, being mindful of other people and whatnot. Cause I was mostly staying in hostels and whatnot in like dorm rooms.
Yeah, you're never gonna get good sleep when you're doing that. You
Yeah.
gotta stay somewhere a few nights to get good sleep. It's like the lizard brain won't let you rest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even I was traveling relatively slow. I would usually try and stay 2 or 3 nights at the bare minimum wherever I was, and usually, if I could, a week or more. And even then, it was just, there was just something about. I think I had that slight. I don't know what you call it, anxiety, the lizard brain. There was always something being like, these are all random people that are just coming in and out at random times of the night, morning. Yeah, just be willing to wake up at any moment, sort of deal. Whereas, after a couple of weeks back home, I just went, oh wow, this is good. But yeah,
Now imagine if you could have that and travel. See, that's the RV, right? Because it's your bed, it's your pillow, it's your blankets, it's all your stuff.
Yeah, and I've met some people doing kind of like the van life. I had some friends doing that and variations of that with trucks and or like a mini truck type of deal. I don't think I'd do that personally myself, but traveling again, I want to travel next year to Europe actually, and I'm certainly just gonna really have a think about how I do it, because I'm not sure I can do it the way that I used to. I don't know. Maybe hostels
Yeah, I
are
mean,
great for meeting people though. So
that's true. You could do the although you could do the hashtag van life thing while traveling, you know, a rental or something like that, and park it when you're done.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that's a kind of in between. The other thing is when you if you if you go to like the camping locations where people take like their RVs or their hashtag van lives, you generally find there's a lot of pretty cool people there to hang out with
yeah.
and chat
Oh,
with and meet too.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. You
So
you meet
there's a lot of networking.
definitely, definitely. What's been some of your favorite places to travel to in the US?
Man, you know it's interesting, but a lot of times it's farms. So we stay at a lot of farms because we're part of this program that lets you stay at farms, and they're like these islands of awesome in the middle of everywhere. Like every state has them, and they're such a treat because there's animals there that you can go, like the kids can go see. They're usually quiet, and sometimes they even have like little shops on there. So that's been traveling around and stopping at different farms has been something I never thought I'd do, and it's so awesome. Montana was surprisingly great. The interesting thing about going to Texas was I think I had preconceived notions. This is years ago now, disclaimer, but years ago, I think I had preconceived notions about Texas and what Texas people were like and the South of America. And I got down there and was proven wrong on everything, right? Like just had to totally reevaluate my conclusions and assumptions I'd come to. I found the nicest, most respectful people I've ever met, you know, and I had to adjust to it. It was such a change. People were so pleasant and so nice that my being, you know, from Seattle area, it took me a little bit. And then I would go back to Texas and I would find I would still after a few days would have to adjust to like, why are these people talking to me? Like, don't talk to me. I'm outside doing stuff. Why are you talking to me? And all that kind of stuff. And that's been a really great part about travel is sort of having an opportunity to reevaluate some of those assumptions that I had made along the way. And then the other thing is it just turns out to be, I guess it's kind of a hobby, you know, maintaining the RV, learning how the systems work, learning how to repair them, the ups and downs of all of that have actually somewhat been enjoyable, expensive, and sometimes crushingly like upsetting, but like inevitably also something that you overcome and adapt to. So that element too of just learning how this ship that I drive down the road works and how to fix its systems and keep it running and keep it in good shape has been kind of intellectually stimulating, and it's something my wife and I can do together, along with taking these road trips to go make memories with the kids and or go meet listeners and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you've got this vlog which I was checking out for a bit, and the amount of times your water's frozen or
Oh yeah, yeah,
the perennial. And there was some really cool ones, like you saw the solar eclipse. That's definitely one of those ones where it's like, oof, I'd really like to see that someday. That'd be really really cool.
that was great. That was such an experience. It made me want to do it again because there's one coming up in 2024 here in the
Yeah, I was
States.
looking last night. There's one in
Yeah.
I think 2028 here, and I'd have to go down to New South Wales to see it here in Australia, because it kind of goes through like the middle-ish of Australia, I guess, and it's kind of like, yeah, maybe I should
It
make
was
the
a
effort. And that,
pretty cool experience, and the crowd, man, because the streets were lined for miles with people just lining up trying to get a spot, and
mm,
boy, everybody was so ecstatic when that sun comes back. You don't expect it. But again, going back to that lizard brain, like it's something weird's going on. It's dark everywhere. It shouldn't be dark right now. There's no sun in the sky. This is weird. And then that sun comes back and it's this moment of euphoria. Like, oh, we're all gonna make it. We're all gonna live. Even though you know it's gonna be fine.
yeah,
And then you could hear in that video some people just screaming. Like they're just screaming with joy that the
yeah.
sun is back. And yeah, that was a powerful moment for sure.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, it really makes you think about all the I've just started the Crucible by Arthur Miller, and it's talking about the Salem witch trials and whatnot, and it's just it's the very start of the book, and I'm already like, no, no, like Humans, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're already starting to get it wrong here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not a great track record. Not
No, no.
not the best.
Absolutely not.
But we do have our moments. I mean, like, it was a pretty neat shared experience with all those people. Not even what I was experiencing, right? I wasn't thinking that would be one of the takeaways. So we have our moments.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, there's a couple of things I that are definitely on the bucket list. Seeing the Northern Lights for me, or
Yes.
I suppose I can do it here in Australia as well. So might not need to go as far as Norway or something like that. But yeah, I was just recounting the other. Well, it was a clip that I'd played of when I was in Guatemala, and I saw a green in the sunrise, and it must have been the green flash. I swear, once again, faulty memory. So I swear I remember seeing green in the sunrise for minutes, but apparently that's not possible. Who knows? And
I like that version. If that's what your takeaway is, that's
yeah,
great.
yeah. I like a lot of my memories. I'm hesitant to part with them, even though a lot of them do turn out to be questionable to say the least.
If that doesn't sum us up right there, right? That's if that's humans to a T. I really like what I've come to a conclusion about. I don't want to give it up.
Yeah. But it has been a while since I've had some of those moments like that, which I think travel just does help to open up. Kind of like we were talking about, the keeping your mind open to new ideas, letting them battle and whatnot. I think actually having some travel and seeing new things, getting on the road, trying new food, all of that does facilitate that unlocking aspect of just not getting stuck in the routine too much.
Mm-hmm. I've even seen it in my kids.
Yeah,
It's been an interesting thing to watch with the young ones, and they didn't really conceptualize the concept of a bunch of states and a big country until we went out on the road, and then they really conceptualize it now. Like, it's amazing. And kind of clicking with the idea that there's different places that have different cultures, even in our own country, I don't think was something that had even crossed their mind until we visited some of those places. So that I think is, I mean, probably applicable to all of us, but it was really something to watch it in my kids kind of happen in real time. Certainly, it's
yeah,
probably happening to me too, right? But I just don't observe it as much.
yeah, and that's why it's it's really useful to kind of have other people's experiences to live through as well. So you can kind of, it's so much easier sometimes to see what someone else is doing wrong and then be or right and changes in them, and then not even realize the same things are going on within yourself, for sure.
That's very true.
Yeah, man, this has been so much fun, Chris. Thanks so much for joining me. We're up to 2 hours now. Nice. Is there anything I can help you with? Anything else you want to chat more about or dive into?
No, it's been a good chance to do this. Check back in, I guess, in a little while. I'd like to know how the value for value stuff is going for you guys and how all of the boost stuff is playing out. I think that's an area that I am intensely interested in, is building out this community. And so you guys are doing it. You're already doing it. And so I say just keep doing that. Stick with it. I think, I mean, I listen and I'm pretty picky. So you're doing something right, because it doesn't take much for me to turn off a podcast.
Oh, cheers, man.
So stick with it. Keep building it.
I do appreciate that, and yeah, it's one of those ones where it's like I look at you as well, and I go like, damn, I know you have a whole lot of support doing it. The whole Jupiter Broadcasting creating network. It's not just one person, but man, like the amount of work and whatnot I see you doing to drive that forward it's inspirational, man. It's something I really want to aim for and try and create something not exactly the same, but there's so much of what you do which I really, really appreciate and think is awesome. So yeah, awesome. Speaking of Jupiter Broadcasting, if someone was interested in learning more about some of these shows, what's the best place to send them to?
Check out jupiterbroadcasting.com, our website that's been totally built by our community. Another amazing value for value exchange. They created an awesome podcast network website at jupiterbroadcasting.com.